And good morning. It is time for the Mike Hewitt Show, brought to you by Renegade River and Spring Lake. And here is your host, Mike Hewitt, as he looks for his headphone adapters and wonders who is in the studio stealing equipment.
Man, I'm telling you, it was frustrating. But between that and my heroic drive-in, I wasn't sure.
You weren't sure?
But here I am. I got my headset plugged in. I can hear. That's a good
That's
thing.
a good start.
Oh, yeah, that's a good start. And listen, I got to tell you, this is kind of one of those fun things. We've got Jim Riley sitting in with us. How long have you been gone, Jim?
Well, I haven't been in this studio for well over 6 weeks, and it's great to see you guys.
Something about a $2.5 million ski trip. Is that what I understand you did?
Yeah, our ski trip did not quite come up to the ski expense of the First Lady of the United States.
So you and Honey Bunch went on separate vacations, and the taxpayers paid $2.5 million.
Just for hers would be if I was the golfer in chief, that would be the case. But no, Honey Bunch and I did pay for our own vacation. We did not spend $2.5 million for a long weekend.
Boy, how passé.
And how passé? Well, we didn't go to Aspen either, and Aspen I perhaps requires a private jet just to get invited to the right parties.
Now, when you were skiing, were you able to acquire the use of the mountain solely for you? Was it just you and Honey Bunch, and they cleared all of the general public?
Well, believe it or not, it felt that way. Because
maybe deodorant, Jim.
No. Well, there is that. That's an interesting point, though. How does the Secret Service, when an important persona like the First Lady of the United States and their two children, when they're on a big public mountain like Buttermilk or Aspen or Snowmass, do they sweep all the folks off the mountain? I don't know. But it would seem to me, given that people who ski today, not only are they bundled up in ski outfits and all, but they've got helmets on and goggles. So it's almost impossible to tell, what kind of human being lurks underneath all of that equipment and that clothing and those helmets and all.
It's almost like a burqa.
Well, it's almost like a burqa, but if someone wanted to strap on, let's say, an explosive device, it would be almost impossible to tell, what's underneath all that clothing. So I don't know what they do out there. I'm glad that they ski in Aspen and that we ski in another place, so that we don't have to learn how.
Secret Service would definitely shuffle you along.
They would hear me muttering, on the lift, and
on your
way
out of there.
Probably move me off to the side. Yes,
I think Honey Bunch could stay, but Jim Riley, you'd be out of there.
A muttering geezer is someone to be fearful of. That's for sure.
I don't know if you saw on Facebook what I'm wanting to talk about today, but I've titled today's show "Then and Now."
Yes, I did. I tried to do a little mental gymnastics as to figure out what the heck you were planning.
This is the thing. We had a caller back. It's been a couple months now, and she called to complain that her husband and her children were always stuck looking at their iPads or their smartphones and playing games. She's perpetually playing games, even at the dinner table. And so if they went to a restaurant, they were playing games. If they were at home trying to eat, they were playing games. She called to ask, is that appropriate? And I got thinking about it after the show that day, and I wanted to do this show ever since. So I got looking on the internet, and I looked at a commuter train circa this year, okay? And everybody's standing around holding a smartphone, just like she was talking about. They're all absolutely in their own little world. The entire commuter train is filled with people looking at it was a commuter bus, looking at their smartphones. Then I went back to 1955. I just arbitrarily picked that year, just so you know, and I found a commuter bus, and everyone was absolutely individualized looking at their newspaper. There was very little difference in terms of their, I don't want to say self-absorption, because they were all looking at whatever the medium was of their time. So that was originally going to be the show, that there's no difference. But then I got looking at the picture a little bit more, and there was a lot of difference, folks. There really was a lot of difference. And in fact, it was overwhelming, the difference.
Now, you had these two photos side by side
on
too.
Facebook, on the show's Facebook page.
Yeah, that's an interesting side by side too. But I looked
Can you
at
see
it.
it?
Yes, and I looked at it, and I kind of caught what you have said so far, which was that it's kind of similar. But now you're saying that there's a difference, which I couldn't discern one.
Listen, in 1955, that's the first. The two pictures, if you go to the Facebook page, folks, so Facebook.com/The Mike Hewitt Show, you'll see the picture I'm talking about. In the left picture, it's black and white. Everyone's reading a newspaper. Everyone is very well dressed. If you look, they look industrious. They have a purpose, and they've got self-respect. That's what I see when I look at this picture. The ladies are all with long coats. All the gentlemen have fedora hats, not all of them, but most of them do. All of the men that I could focus on, believe me, I've ballooned this picture up. They all have ties on, okay? Then I look to the 2015 page. First off, they're all overweight, and I'm not throwing stones at them because I am too. They're all overweight.
That's interesting, and yes, I see that.
They are all overweight, and every one of them is dressed like a sovereignty pig. They just got T-shirts pulled out. They are not. I don't see the self-respect. I don't see the industrious attitude. They don't look like they have a purpose. I look at it and go, it looks like the same train. It really, or the same commuter bus. It does. But the people inside have changed dramatically. They really have. Can you see that, Brian? I'm telling you, folks, when you look at the two images, America has really changed a lot. And I know it sounds so cliche to say it, but it has. And part of the difference goes to the word respect. I used to quip. I'd say, when the fedora went out of style, so did respect. I like fedoras, by the way, and I'd wear one to the studio if it weren't for the headset that I finally found the plug for. And Jim lost his. He got so excited about it. But when I started looking at it, so I said, well, what are the other differences? And I started looking for different pictures from 1955. That was my marker year. So most of the pictures that I found are from 1955 plus or minus a year or two. The very next picture I found, I put it on the Facebook page again, and it's three young people. I've seen this picture before, by the way, but it's three young, how old would you say those folks are, Jim? You see the one holding a rifle?
Oh, yeah. What would they be, 10 years old?
10 years old. So
Yeah.
They're standing in school. You can tell it's school because there's the classic chalkboard in the background. The various projects are taped on and around the image. And one of the three young folks is holding a rifle. They're clearly having marksman class in public school. And I posted that on Facebook, and somebody offered the quip that the 1% of the crazies back then has grown. So I thought, well, maybe he's right. That was, by the way, that was my brother that offered that. So I think he was differing his view from me. I think he was maybe suggesting the other side of this argument. And that was okay. But I got looking at it, has the 1% really changed? I don't know where he got that number yet. But when I start looking at crime rates and all of that, in terms of the violence with firearms, and I'm not trying to make this show about that, but the truth of it is that when you look at violent crime or accidental crime, its media has changed also. That's one of the things that's changed dramatically. So if you have one shooting and they're reported every 15 minutes on all of the cable news channels, and it sounds like everybody's shooting everywhere, wait a minute, it's still just the one shooting that we're talking about out of 320 million people. My point in saying all of that is that we've actually went the other way on things like firearms, where there used to be, whether you liked firearms, whether you wanted to be a collector, there wasn't that sense of fear because everyone had an opportunity to train with them. And fear and training are the first step to making it a safer society, in my view. So that was one of the things that along my picture path that I found that was extremely striking. Now if you draw a picture, if you eat your Pop-Tart into the shape of a gun, they eject you from, you're done. But
well, from an elementary school.
this
Yeah.
is an elementary school.
Yeah, but no, but a Pop-Tart. I mean, if in fact, I mean, we have real examples of a school suspending and punishing a young, a 6 or 7 year old for eating a Pop-Tart, taking a few bites out of it so that it looked like a gun, and then him realizing that it was a gun, and teacher then seeing this. And because of the no tolerance, and you talk about some changes that have happened, this concept of no tolerance, which is purely a substitute for no judgment, no tolerance, kicked this, suspended this young child out of school for taking the wrong level of bites out of a Pop-Tart.
It's important.
Yes, folks, it happened in our public school system in the United States of America last year.
Listen, I think you touched on exactly what the issue was, though, that it's gotten we've become so regimented and regulated, and I think the cause of it is that those folks that are sitting on those various what I call do-gooder boards. I'm sorry, I'm not apologetic on this point at all. You got a little body of do-gooders, and they sit around and say, well, our teachers and our parents and all of those people are just too stupid. We've got to regulate anything that might come into a judgment for them, so that when this happens, they can look to the policy book and it says do that. And the assumption is that there is no judgment capacity, and so the regulation and the do-gooder crowd have filled that vacuum in by saying Pop-Tarts are a dangerous thing when they look like a handgun. What a change since then and now. Imagine sitting down with somebody who was a 35-year-old parent in 1955 and saying why your child was just expelled. Imagine telling the Pop-Tart story to a parent in 1955.
Well, of course, in 1955, the parents, both the mom and the dad, would go right to the school and probably punch the teacher in the nose, and that would be the end of it.
Yep.
The teacher would never do it again. The parents would go home, and that would be the end of it. But it's a different world. And one thing I noticed, getting back to your photo of the people on the bus, in the old days, and if you look at that photo, people are reading newspapers and perhaps magazines. In the new photo, you've got about half the folks have got headphones on. They're listening probably not to a book on tape. They're probably listening to music of some sort. And I don't know what they're watching on their the smartphones or their iPads, but when I have looked over the shoulder of young people in particular, what I tend to see almost exclusively is Twitter and instant messages, messaging, the short, tiny little sentences back and forth, or video games. It doesn't seem to me that those people who are commuting today, or certainly our young people, are using these devices in the same manner that we would use a newspaper. I know that in my case, and I'm sure in your case also, that I read newspapers all the time. I spend almost all my time when I'm on a smartphone or a computer reading either books or the media. But young people are not doing that, and we see the result of that with these the various videos, be it on the Tonight Show or Water's World, where they interview young, intelligent, attractive-looking either college grads or young men and women in college, and ask really, really tough historical questions like, who was the first president of the United States? And you find that a frightening number of them can't even answer simple questions like that. So they may be on a train or a subway or a bus, and they may be using their device, which we know is fantastic because you can read almost every single newspaper in the world on a smartphone, but they're not using it to impart information or wisdom. They're using it basically as a time waster.
I think our priorities have changed. The things that are important to us now versus then.
Of course.
I think they
sadly,
are.
Sadly,
one of the things I find fascinating, and often on the show I've said a number of times, I talk about tuition having risen 800% from 1980 coming forward. Okay?
800%.
Well, but
Wow.
income since 1980 has doubled. It's almost exactly double by math. But tuition has went up 800%. So then preparing for the show, I thought, well, forget 1980. What was it? It's almost 2,000% more now to college tuition. compared to what it was in 1955.
Now, is this the actual dollars, or is this
It's just
dollars?
dollars of cost.
Okay.
What it costs in and what it costs now, and that's the difference. The average income back then was $4,418 with the average. The average income now is somewhere in the 45,000 range. So that's up dramatically. So must have been a huge jump between 55 and 80, because it was only double since 1980. But if you do this math, that's a dramatic increase. In fact, there's a graph floating around somewhere that shows income had been a steady increase. Well, let me say differently. It jumped pretty significantly following World War II, planed off for a while, and then it made two gigantic jumps heading to where we're at. But when I look at prices in general, a week worth of groceries in 1955 was $10, and now it's about $200, which is plus or minus a 1,500% increase. AAA says, this is doing AAA math. In 1955, the average annual driving was 10,000 miles per year at a cost of 9 cents. And then they only gave me numbers through 2010, but that had went up from 9 cents up to 57.3 cents. And we're driving further now. Went from 9,000 to 15,000. Average car back then was 2,000, and the average car now, depending on who's telling the story, is in the mid-30s. That's a lot of money. That's a big increase.
Well, yes and no, and I'm not denying that things cost more, but certainly many things cost significantly less. Certainly, almost every level of technology, and I would argue today you can go out and you can buy a nice brand new car for $14,000.
Right.
A car that is far safer than a Pinto or a Volkswagen of the '60s. When I was in college, that
was in 1945.
That would be 1845. The mules were they're always on sale. No, but when I was in college in the late '60s, and in high school for that matter, when the Ford Mustang first came out, it was $2,000. It had no radio. At $2,000, it had the balloon tires, which anyone who was in high school during those days knows of someone, if not personally, who died in a car accident because of a blowout. That was a very common way of very significant car accidents. Today, the Pinto, by the way, was $2,000, and so was the Ford Maverick, all $2,000, 1995 when they first came out. When you compare the kind of vehicle that you can get today for $14,000 or $16,000, actually they are a better buy today. They're certainly safer. They last 200,000 miles. Certainly a 40,000, 50,000 mile car in our day was almost a junker. So lots of things that are less expensive. But what has become far more expensive has been anything that is touched by
the government.
You bet, and college tuition in particular.
On the point of cars, before we move along, I saw a report from NADA, the National Automobile Dealer Association, been a couple years ago, so I don't want to quote it exact, but it articulates exactly what you just said. And it went on to say that if you look at what you're purchasing, the cost of cars have actually went down, even if you look at the average car. And their rationale was the numbers of things that have been caused by government, by the way, and that wasn't the point of their article, but it was the reality of it. The numbers of items, airbags, and a whole list of things that have been regulated into the vehicle that now you're paying for. It's nice that they're there. I'm not complaining, but that's some I wouldn't have wanted to got in the average accident in 1955 because those cars were not abundantly safe. Now, they looked heavy and all of that, but there was no crumple zones. When you got a front-end collision in a 1955 Chevy, you had a problem. So, and that's just not the case anymore.
And let's face it, the government, there's always been an argument about those who disagree with government decisions as to, if you disagree, you are anti-government. You want to have absolutely no regulations whatsoever. That isn't the case. I don't know anybody who believes that. We want to have safer vehicles. We believe government has a role in making sure that cars and other vehicles are safe. What I found stunning today was, again, given that government is supposed to protect us, the pool of victims of the General Motors ignition switch debacle is now grown to, I believe, 58 deaths. that were caused by this ignition. Well, basically, a corporation, a criminal corporation, certainly people doing criminal measures that resulted in the death of almost 60 people so far.
Listen, hold that thought.
Protect us from that.
Hold that thought, because we're going to go to a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the cost of gas in 1955. We'll be right back, folks.
Renegade River in Spring Lake wants to buy your used handguns and hunting guns. Renegade River, your hunting, camping, and survival store. Stop in and check out their new and used firearms, sporting goods, Army and Navy supplies, and survival gear. Downtown Spring Lake, next to the police station.
Welcome back to the Mike Hewitt Show. I'm Mike Hewitt, sitting in with Jim Riley today. We're talking about then and now, 1955, Jim's era.
Well, I was there. I was, wearing my short pants and.
Boy, there's a vision, Brian.
Yeah, that's pretty frightening.
Listen,
well, those are the days of Ozzie and Harriet. Those were the days of a little maybe before Leave It to Beaver, but those were the days when the American family was revered. And you mentioned the way people dress, where the man in the family either wore a suit to work if he had a white-collar job, or the guy, the families who worked in the factories and had the blue-collar jobs. They did dress up, and they did have a sense of pride in what they did.
Part of it was things come pretty easy to folks nowadays. Even the proverbial poor folks in America now have a significantly higher standard of living than even middle to low class income-wise did in 1955. And an example like that, it's all the cliches. It's color television, it's a car, it's a cell phone, it's air conditioning, it's a microwave oven. But when I'm looking at all of these old pictures, like I talked about right before we went to break, about gas prices. So when I first look at these old pictures, right now, folks, I'm looking at it's a 7600 gas station. Instead of 76, this is 7600. Picture from 1955, the gas price was 27 cents. So we can get hung up on the numbers a little bit, but some of the things that have changed, that you pause and look a little bit closer at the picture. I'm looking at a gas station attendant who pumped gas. Now, I'm old enough, and there's some listeners listening that are old like us that remember having people pump gas for them. But when we went through the gas crisis and the gas shortage of the early 70s, one of the things that we came out of the other side with was more higher costs and less services. And we seem to have just went, okay, let's move on. And there are times like right now when I got to get gas and the snow is blowing sideways that I'm wishing somebody would pump the doggone thing for me. But we've given up services, and what happens, it isn't the loss of the service. It's the effect that it has on our culture, because these things go away, and it changes how we view things just a little bit incrementally, one thing at a time. Does that make sense, Jim?
Well, yes, and in many cases, though, I mean, while it is nice to pull into a gas station, and back in the old days, they would check your oil, they would check your tires, they would clean the windshield, they did a variety of different things. We've made the decision. There was actually in Muskegon up until not too many years ago a full service gas station. People have said, "Look, I'd just soon do that myself.
Okay.
I don't necessarily." Want to pay the additional amount per gallon to have it done. We make those decisions. Airlines back in the 60s and the 70s, folks would wear suits, and women would get dressed up, and the children would get dressed up to fly on airplanes, and they would get very nice meals with linen napkins and things of that sort. But the price was massively more expensive. Now people get on and dress like bums. They're really a little different than it was maybe taking a bus across the country, but it's affordable, and it allows the folks who are not the wealthy to have the advantage of travel. Yes, there's a drop in culture. I know if you're like the Obamas and others, and you want to fly on a private jet, and you don't want to rub elbows with the little people. You want to keep those prices high so the little people don't annoy you. That's fine. Be proud of it. I'm not. I like the fact that average folks have access to things that only rich folks had not so many years ago.
I can tell you this. When I was a youth growing up, 8, 9, 10, 12, that age, going out to dinner with my family was a big deal.
Oh, yes.
Even to a family restaurant. I mean, we're not talking high-end elbow stuff. We're just going out to a local Big Boy was in the area that I grew up in, with just a family restaurant. That was a big deal now. So you didn't want to dress like a slovenly pig because you might not be doing this again for a while. It was a big event.
Honey Bunch has a photo of she and her sister and brother all dressed up to go. Typically, you would go on Sunday, perhaps after church, and the little girls had white gloves on to go to what was called then in the Indianapolis area the teepee, which is a lot like a Big Boy.
Sure.
They would dress up with little white gloves to go out to the big event of the week or perhaps the month.
And then I paused and I tried to, I'm not trying to be negative whatsoever because, listen, there have been some changes since then, to your point, a couple points that have been good changes. Racism and segregation and those things had to end. I don't know that we're ended yet, but inevitably I think we're heading in the right direction. So when I look back and say, yes, there have been some changes, some of them I don't think have been very wise changes. Some of them we're on the path to getting better on. Agreed?
Well, yes. I mean, there's clearly there have been many, many benefits. Certainly, just the simplest, probably the knee-jerk measure is longevity. People in this country are living longer than they ever have.
Other than American Pickers, when's the last time you saw a cigarette machine?
A cigarette machine. Isn't that interesting? Been a while.
Oh, yeah. Winston tastes good like a cigarette should. That's the little cutout I'm looking at. That was TV back then. Back then when they were also advertising liquor on television. You don't see those ads anymore.
But by the same token, while it's good that fewer people are smoking today than in the past, and I think it's even better that it isn't cool to smoke, which is maybe the main reason why folks got into it years and years ago. But back in the 50s and the 60s, we didn't have the drug issue that we have today. I noticed this morning there's a fire at someplace in West Michigan, a house, and police are surrounding it. I know last week there was a house or a trailer or something that had blown up because of a meth lab. Cigarettes are bad, but the drug issue in this country is far, far worse than anyone could have ever imagined, even 20 years ago.
One fascinating thing when you're looking at cigarette smoking, I'm a non-smoker. In fact, I'm approaching my 5th anniversary for not smoking.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah. So I'm. By the way, I've not turned into a holier than thou non-smoker. I still look at it and say this is not part of the government's. It's not in the realm of their power to make the kind of decisions that they're making, and I believe that. But what I find fascinating about the anti-smoking crusade now, is that many of the same folks that are extraordinarily, almost to the point of being religious in their approach to non-smoking, are also advocates of marijuana, which is like, last time I saw a report on it, it said that one joint was equal to 20 Marlboro cigarettes.
In terms of the nicotine and the various chemicals that you would ingest.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, why? How can, if we're on a health kick, how do we advocate this while attacking? Some of those things are so political that they just flatly defy any kind of reasoning beyond that. In my view. How about black and white television set? Do you remember when your family got your first color television?
Very vaguely. I'm not sure we ever had a color TV when I was a kid.
Do you remember when family got TV, period?
Yes, I do. Yep. And it was, remember with the rabbit ears, and of course you had the 2 or 3 channels depending on where you lived.
Yep.
And that was a big issue, you bet.
But at the same time, I remember when cable was introduced, and it was sold with the idea that, yes, you'll have to pay a little, but there'll be no commercials. Do you remember that? Now there's like 99 channels of virtually nothing, in my view, filled with commercials.
And what is...
I don't remember the commercial-free part. But
oh, yeah. That's how it was originally spun.
I know the premium channels had that. HBO and Showtime were back in the day, and they didn't have any commercials. But
very early 80s, maybe even late 70s, they were out trying to sell these this would be commercial-free. For premium, you're right about that, absolutely. But that's just not come to pass.
But what has come to pass, and again, if if the government will allow the genius that is the human mind to continue to flourish, what is happening now? Government has enforced the fact that that in our area, Comcast or what's the one that you have down in Grand Haven, the cable Charter, they have a government-enforced monopoly. Government-enforced monopolies always end up collapsing upon themselves because they end up abusing their customers. What's happening now? We have Netflix, you have Amazon Prime, you have all sorts of choices now popping up so that people can disconnect, pull the plug on cable TV. People will always move to choice. When we have the lock of cable TV, I remember when I finally pulled the plug a couple years ago, I was paying, I believe, $160, $170 a month for cable TV and internet. Now I believe I'm paying something in the neighborhood of $60 for the two, and using the power of the internet, the power of the human mind, to avoid costs and to give myself far more choices than I had before. Certainly Netflix and Amazon Prime are about $8, $9, $10 a month.
Yeah, see, they've got me hook, line, and sinker. I've got the telephone through them, I've got the cable for the internet through them, and I've got television through them. I think I'm pushing like $200 a month.
Well, and the choices are out there. There will be more choices. I just saw just last week another alternative, which is coming from Amazon, which allows you to have access to things like ESPN and some of the other channels where there used to be a prisoner. But again, that's technology. If government keeps out, the only area that I'm aware of that has gone up are areas where government has interceded to keep competition from flourishing.
Speaking of government, I touched on in the first segment, because I always do, college tuition, which I think it's America on drugs. It's so insane. 1955 college tuition was $198 per year.
When I was at Michigan State in the 60s, it was around $450. And let me explain a few things that have happened since then.
Yep.
College tuition used to be the biggest expense that you had when you sent a child to college. Today, it may continue to be the biggest, but it certainly is not the only. You have student fees that can be, in many cases, thousands of dollars a year, just simply for the privilege of going to college. Books that used to be $3 and $4 and $5 are now in the hundreds of dollars. Just the simple act of having a book for a class may cost you $100, $200, $300 for that class. And, of course, we're now seeing what these dorms are doing with gourmet meals and things of that sort, where the cost of housing is just gone through the roof.
So and in the first segment, by the way, I cited an inaccurate number. It's one of the reasons I wanted to bring it back on the college tuition thing. It's $198, and to your point, since then they've piled on the fees and the et ceteras. This number is only through 2010, and so it's clearly not skied downhill since then. Speaking of skiing. In 2010, tuition and fees to attend 1 year at a public college was $10,800 compared to the $198, and that was a 5,300% increase. And you know what I don't get? I don't get why Americans are absolutely so convinced that this is the single path. They're so convinced that when they get done with their college loans, their loans are on par with a typical mortgage now. And I think that's insane. What would the colleges do if for just 1 year, everybody in America said, you know what, we're going to pass just this 1 year?
Well, let me give you a comparison between our generation, the three of us here, and what's happened today, because you want to compare the old days. One of the first things that a college graduate, not someone who had wasted 1 or 2 or 3 years in a worthless degree without getting the degree.
Average, by the way, let me stop you for just 1 second. The average person, now just doing the math, that signs up to go to college, there's only 50% of those that sign up actually complete their college pursuit.
Actually, it's significantly less than that. There is.
It goes from college to college. I sat and read the stats here a few weeks ago on the air.
Your stats, though, I'm sure, are for 4-year colleges.
Yes.
The problem is the 2-year colleges. We've got a 2-year college in the eastern part of the state that has a graduation rate, I believe, within 4 years for a 2-year program that is under 10%.
Yeah.
So these people are not just borrowing money.
Walk away with a big debt and nothing for it.
Well, not only that, they didn't do anything for the 2 years. In many cases, they're not even working and doing things of that sort. But let me give a comparison of where the country has moved in these last few decades. If you were a college graduate back in the 60s or the 70s or the 80s even, as soon as you could, of course, you'd graduate and you would get a job. Typically, within the first 10 years, in many cases within the first 5 years, you would be able to save the 10% necessary to put down to buy a home.
Right.
It might be a trailer home. It might be a small fixer-upper. It could be any number of things. But the reality was that you would go out and borrow, and let's just say in today's parlance, you would go out and borrow $50,000 to $100,000, and you would have a home. And one of the things one of the reasons that the government encourages people to buy homes is that they buy washers and dryers and the furnaces and carpet and any number of things. It's good for the economy. All right. So you graduated from college, you got a $50,000 amount of debt. Today, we have young people who've gone to college, who graduate, they have the $50,000 of debt, they have no home.
Right. We've got to listen. We've got to go.
Is that progress?
It's not progress. We've got to go to a break. But folks, think about this while we're at break. We're okay, evidently, dealing with a well more than 5,300% increase in college tuition, but we grumble and whine over a 20-cent bump in gas. Our values are, to me, a little bit upside down. Folks, we'll be right back.
Renegade River in Spring Lake wants to buy your used handguns and hunting guns. Renegade River, your hunting, camping, and survival store. Stop in and check out their new and used firearms, sporting goods, Army and Navy supplies, and survival gear. Downtown Spring Lake, next to the police station.
Welcome back to the Mike Hewitt Show. Sitting with me is Jim Riley, and we're talking about then and now. When we went to the break, we left off with, imagine the way we value things nowadays, where we've got well over a 5,300% increase in tuition and in health care, but we'll sit forever in some gas line to save 5 cents because it's cheaper up the street or whatever our rationale is. I don't understand what kind of value system that we employ when we don't have a problem with a $5,300 increase.
Let me explain it to you.
In the two things that mean the most to us. And thanks, government, because you're the one that helped.
Let me explain it to you. When you look at gasoline prices, you have to pay that out of your own pocket.
Yep.
And you do it quite often, once or even maybe 2 or 3 times a week. So it's an exact cost to your lifestyle. Every 20 cents per gallon that you have to give to the gasoline store comes right out of your lifestyle. Your health care, for the most part, most people view it as free. You either have it as part of your employer, you have it as part of the insurance, which of course is you may complain about your insurance bill, but for the most part, you view it as free.
Jim, I have a $3,000 deductible now.
Well, things just changed a little bit ago.
Just 5 years ago, if someone said they had a $3,000, we would have thought, wow, you've got junk insurance. What a shame. Now that's the way it is.
Well, that's most people.
Marxism doesn't work real well.
Well, we found Obamacare has changed everything, but up until Obamacare, most people did not have to pay for their own insurance, and the same thing goes with college. What happens is with young folks who go to college, they are not as interested, and again, they're young people. They're not as interested in what it costs because much of it is paid for by loans. Not only do they get loans, in many cases, and we have a young man in his 20s who comes to our little Carmen's group every Thursday, and you're certainly welcome to visit us from 7 to about 10 at Carmen's downtown Muskegon. We talk politics, but he was telling us of how young people will go to MCC with their grants. They will go to the window and get their books, which are fully funded as part of the grant. They will then go just down 100 yards or so to the other window and sell those brand new books without ever opening them as used books in order to get the cash. So the reason that there is no outcry over the real cost of college has been up till now is that very few people actually really felt it because they're getting the loans. They didn't have to start paying back. Now, as these folks have moved on in life and the bills are getting higher and they're frightened about the expense that they've incurred, now we're seeing a political movement. The President of the United States just within the last month got up and said, hey, we've got to do something about letting these folks not have to pay back their loans.
Listen, there's been
It's going to happen.
There's been a move long before Obama to cause a 4-year public education. In other words, what was K through 12, in these folks' view, will become K through 16. That move has been on afoot for a number of years now, and President Obama is just helping to push that along. And that's why, speaking of that, one of the things you said when we were at break, I really want to dial you back to a little bit, or bring you back to, is that not only are we looking for a number somewhere above 5,300% for a college tuition increase, but that doesn't measure the amount of tax dollars that are being paid into our public universities in the state of Michigan per pupil.
I did the math. Now, this is about 10 years ago, but I did the math at Michigan State University, where I had graduated many decades ago. The average amount of federal subsidy per student per year at Michigan State was about $10,000 per student. So in other words, take whatever the tuition and fees and what have you may be, take whatever the various scholarships. This doesn't include scholarships. This is straight subsidy to the university of about $10,000 per student. Now, all added up may be valuable. Certainly, if you go to Harvard or Yale or Princeton, you're going to pay more than you're going to pay at Michigan State or University of Michigan. That degree has some value.
How about a liberal arts degree and nothing?
Well, and therein lies the issue. These young people, for the most part, are unable to get jobs in at least half of the degree programs.
So you got a person that owes $80,000 and they're making $35,000 a year if they got a job. More often than not even the field that they took the college degree for. What a disconnect we've got going on.
Well,
here.
there's a disconnect, and those are the ones who graduate. What about the ones that spend 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years going to school, incurring the loans, and do not graduate? I know this as an employer. If I see someone, a young person, comes to me and says, they're 27 years old. What have you done for the last 7 years? Well, I went to school. Did you graduate? No. That's far, far worse than a 27-year-old who's been working at a job. Doesn't matter what the job is. What happens is you not only have wasted the years, the earning years where you might have been earning a living and perfecting a skill, encouraging all the debt. You are far, far worse off than had you not gone to the college during that time.
If I have and I did a lot of hiring for 3 decades, and if I had a person sitting in front of me that had 10 years of experience, let's dial it back, a 5 years worth of experience.
In a real job. Oh, my golly.
Versus a person that had a 4-year degree, I'm going to take the 5 years experience every single time.
In a minute.
Because that teaches critical thinking. This person probably won't spell Chrysler as if Christ had a dealership. And I saw that, and I'm thinking, no kidding. What was your grade point average again? I want a person that's learned critical thinking by on-the-job experience in real life.
Well, there's another issue, and that is exactly what are they getting? What are they getting for the years and the thousands of dollars they're putting in? The quality of the degree compared from the good old days has declined to the point where it's almost worthless in many cases.
I had 2 different state senators on the show back last year, and we got on this topic a little bit. It wasn't the main topic, but both of them independently told me, and I went and researched it, they were absolutely correct, that our state constitution dictates that the legislature will provide funding, but it does not. There's no mechanism for our elected officials to provide guidance. They just got to say, here's the check. Go, what the heck kind of system is that?
Well, because it buys votes for the big education establishment.
Well, it buys them a lot of goodies. I mean, that was the U of M study that was in MLive.com last year. It was the top 16 executives at U of M made $1 million on average
These are the employees at University of Michigan. Yeah.
And you said, no, and listen, I don't have, I'm not one of those people where I've got class envy. In fact, I reject that politics wholeheartedly. But I do have a calculator, and I sit back and say, what did you do? Did you generate that kind of revenue? Some people will push back. Well, maybe the coach did. All right, maybe he generated that kind of revenue. But when I sit back with earnestness and say the top 16 really cause an effect worth $1 million a piece on average, because not all of them made it. Some of them were well under $1 million, and some of them were well over. But they didn't generate that kind of value for the public. They just didn't. To me, it's almost theft.
And they couldn't generate that kind of income in the private sector because no private sector would pay them for the kind of production that they are producing. Absolutely not.
It just defies gravity. That's how I see that. What do you think?
Well, I think that we need to start having shows like this and others to implore people to make wise decisions. And we've got to stop government from enabling people and encouraging them to make the wrong decision. Taking a young person who has barely gotten out of high school and giving them thousands of dollars to go to college is a big, big mistake.
One of the things I really wanted to drive home before we run out of time, we're down to about a minute. One of the differences, and I mentioned in the opening part of the first segment, was when I look at all of these pictures, especially in total, man, there's just a loss of respect. There's a loss of saying this thing we're going to do is special. If we don't, and by the way, I never even got to family. We've got a babies being born to 47% of the babies are being birthed by non-wed women. Now, back then it was 13% in 1955.
Well, over 70% in the black community.
And listen, when you look at the results, of a single parent, again, I've been saying this for months now, but when you look at the results of single parenthood on society, this is not an attack on single parents, but single parenthood as a policy is destroying America. I believe that.
Well, there have been too many studies that provide proof of what you just said. And again, if you have a policy that encourages single parenthood, you're going to get more single parents.
You can find us at themikehewittShow.com. And by the way, go back to Facebook, /The Mike Hewitt Show on Facebook. Folks, we'll talk to you next Wednesday at 9 a.m. Have a great week.
Renegade River in Spring Lake wants to buy your used handguns and hunting guns. Renegade River, your hunting, camping, and survival store. Stop in and check out their new and used firearms, sporting goods, Army and Navy supplies, and survival gear. Downtown Spring Lake, next to the police station.